To discuss all the latest in global energy markets, let's now cross over to Dr. Oliver McPherson-Smith in Washington, D.C., who is the Energy Director at the America First Policy Institute and a Research Fellow at the Stanford University. Oliver, it's great to have you on the show.
Morning, Abby.
Great to see you. Well, now the United States is easing sanctions on Venezuela ahead of the country's 2024 elections. How is this impacting oil markets?
We've seen global oil prices drop about 1%, 1.5% since this news broke. But as always, the devil is in the details. We're expecting to see about 200,000 additional barrels reaching the market each day. The question here is when. It's going to take a long time for Venezuela to actually ramp up that production and see those oil barrels reach the market. But then secondly, we have to be watching very closely for the actual conduct of the elections in Venezuela. Over the past 2 decades, we have not seen free and fair elections in that South American country. So there's a high likelihood that there will be a lot of pressure here in the United States to reimpose those sanctions. That pressure we're already seeing from various people in different communities because the good faith that the Venezuelan regime will actually follow this plan simply is not there.
All right. I mean, like you said, the devil is in the detail. Let's move on and look at the Russian state gas company Gazprom declaring today that it is working on designing another export pipeline to China. Will this be an economic lifeline for Vladimir Putin?
Let's work through this methodically to understand what's really going on here. Firstly, Russia needs to produce said gas. Can they do it? Probably at this point, but we have to remember that the Russian economy is under huge pressure from sanctions. Look at Venezuela, for example. Look at Iran. Their ability to produce energy after years under global sanctions, Western sanctions, is heavily diminished. That attrition we're already seeing within the Russian economy, particularly within the aviation sector, and the lack of access to supply parts or repair parts. So could they produce this gas in theory? Maybe, we'll see. Secondly, it's going to take between 5 and 10 years to actually build out the Power of Siberia 2, Sila-Sibiri-2 pipeline. A lot can happen within 5 to 10 years. And so they're really banking on there being demand there, which really brings us to the third part. Will China buy all of this natural gas, and at what price, which is the crucial detail there? We know that the Chinese Communist Party is incredibly fickle about not developing a reliance on any one energy partner. That's why they buy so much natural gas from not only Russia today, but also from Turkmenistan, from Uzbekistan. Will they want to put all of their eggs in that one Russian basket or pipeline in this case? We'll see, but there's a lot of skepticism for very good reasons.
Right, that's certainly a very important question, and 5 to 10 years is certainly a long time in relation to the realities on ground. Well, amid the hostilities in the Middle East, Iran is also calling for an oil embargo on Israel. Are these calls gaining any form of traction?
Short answer, no. If we look closely at where Israel buys its oil, it's a very, very different story from the messages we're hearing out of Tehran from the regime. Look, relations between Israel and its Arab neighbors have warmed. Its Muslim neighbors have warmed in recent years. That was a fantastic achievement of the previous administration, the Trump administration, with the signing of the Abraham Accords just 3 years ago. We've seen efforts to continue that warming of relations, particularly between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That hasn't come to fruition under the current administration. But looking closely at where Israel continues to buy its oil, its largest sources are from Kazakhstan and from Azerbaijan. You'll note that Israel has had good relations with these countries since the fall of the Soviet Union. Does Tehran have a huge amount of sway with these two producers? I would say not. So we'll hear similar sorts of calls from Tehran, as we've heard in the past, and we will no doubt hear in the future. But are we going to see some sort of 1973 style embargo of Israel or her allies like the United States, perhaps? Don't bet on it, not at this point.
All right, very important questions there, Oliver. But before we ask you to leave, could you paint us a picture of some of the wider implications of the proposed oil embargo in Israel should this take full effect?
Well, look, it's very, very hard to predict what that would mean. We know that the United States is sending military assets into the region. There's a huge amount of tension. And to be honest, I think everyone's on tenterhooks watching how this plays out. Of course, the United States position is very, very clear about supporting our closest ally in the Middle East, Israel. But the United States does have huge and very productive relations with not only Israel's neighboring countries, the likes of Egypt, the likes of Jordan, but also with Saudi Arabia, with Iraq, with Kuwait, with Bahrain, with Qatar. These countries all form part of the global community, and the United States is, of course, engaging closely with them to try and prevent some sort of spillover or escalation of these hostilities, which would be disastrous for global energy markets. So there's a lot of legwork going on there, and hopefully this will be contained and hopefully de-escalated in due course with peace returning to the Holy Land.
Yeah, certainly, hopefully is the key word. Many thanks, Oliver. McPherson-Smith joining us from Washington, D.C. there.